I think the stigma with Wolverine, from my perspective, is that he is the definitive action hero star. You know what I'm talking about. Bruce Willis movies where he has no emotions and is a solid walking block of testosterone, and the story is usually extraordinarily weak and only exists as a framing device around what is, admittedly, some brilliant action pieces and lots of explosions. Many Wolverine stories seem to be this very thing, but in comic book form. Even stories like Old Man Logan and Enemy of the State, which have been hyped up by many as being great stories, don't really work for me because they are all style with very little of anything else. Now, you may be a huge fan of those kinds of stories I just described, and if you are, then I won't judge you. But as someone who appreciates story over mindless action, and character over mindless action, this kind of, I cannot stress the air quotes enough, story really doesn't work for me. Like, ever. Enter Warren Ellis on Wolverine in the mid to late 1990s. A few things you should know if you don't already. 1. Warren Ellis is a very popular writer. 2. I don't like everything he has ever done, but a few things were really exceptional. 3. Warren Ellis hasn't always been looked at as this demigod that he is today. It was really around the time that Stormwatch, a Wildstorm comic book series he revamped, was transformed into The Authority, that Ellis became a name to be feared. But he was writing from the mid-90s on books like Hellstorm and Excalibur, and eventually Wolverine, for a 4-issue story arc called Not Dead Yet. Now, even when Warren Ellis does something that I don't really care for, or doesn't strike my fancy, I won't go so far as to say that it's worthless or has no right to exist. Even some of the things he's done that I don't like, they are still leaps and bounds ahead of those mindless action stories that I talked about earlier. So when I got this book in an eBay lot, yes, the same eBay lot that I got the Brood Trouble in the Big Easy book from, check out my review of that book I did a few days ago, I figured, okay, I don't usually seek out Wolverine stories, even though most people would say he is firmly part of the X franchise, and I am a huge X fanatic. But no, I don't see the need to really seek out Wolverine stories unless they are insanely hyped up as being all that and a bag of chips. Even if this is before everyone knew who he was, this is still Warren Ellis. Surely this will be good, right? Well, as you can tell from me tempting fate like that, the book really wasn't that great, unfortunately. I went into the little intro about mindless action films like The Fast and the Furious, or the later Die Hard films, or anything with The Rock in it, because that's essentially what this book is. I don't find it especially engaging because the story is just a series of bullets, explosions, and other forms of death and destruction. These things are fine to use in a story, but to appropriate a metaphor I've used before, they should be considered the piece of green stuff that's on the side of your plate when you order a hamburger. You still want the hamburger, which is the engaging characters and consistent story. And if you get the green thing, that's nice, but that's not the meal. And this story, I felt like, after reading it, I didn't get the hamburger I wanted. Let me quickly get through the plot of the book and then talk about my issues with it. The story begins some 10 years ago when Wolverine is having drinks with a Scottish assassin guy. Wolverine is dating the daughter of a Chinese filmmaker who has apparently ticked off some gangsters. These gangsters hire Logan's assassin friend to kill the filmmaker. Logan and his lady love come home early to find Papa dead, and Logan gives chase, throws the motorcycle at the assassin guy, and then it explodes, destroying the whole dock that the guy was on. Logan's lady friend then breaks up with him, saying that he has death on his hands. And let's be honest, when your honey finds out that you've been hanging out with an assassin willingly for several months, that's not a good thing, like ever. Jump forward to the present day. Logan no longer has adamantium coating his entire skeleton or his bone claws, because that was a thing that briefly happened in the 1990s. In theory, this would be a great thing, because Wolverine has this reputation of being more of a juggernaut than, well, the Juggernaut. I don't like it when people whine about Superman being too strong and thus being too boring, but I really don't have any desire to read about a character like Wolverine who I don't ever get the feeling is in any kind of danger when he's out in the field of battle. This is why, during Chris Claremont's run on the X-Men in the 1980s, there was this feeling that he could die. In a segment set in the future story Days of Future Past, Wolverine dies when he is hit by a heat ray from a Sentinel. During a big story where the X-Men fought the adversary in Texas, there was a caption that stuck with me to this day that said that while Wolverine does have a healing factor that takes care of his injuries, if he keeps pushing himself and doesn't give his body a chance to rest, he could, in theory, die. These elements, I feel, could do wonders for making people a little bit more interested in Wolverine as the star in his own series. But how does this reflect on the Not Dead Yet story? Well, throughout this entire story, Logan is being gunned down by people who he believes are working for the Scottish assassin guy who isn't as dead as Logan thought. And like I said, he doesn't have the adamantium anymore, which makes him a little bit more killable in theory, right? But even when adamantium-coated grenade shrapnel is coming at him, Wolverine still doesn't feel like he's in any kind of real danger, ever. He still is cutting through every bad guy like hot butter, and still, weirdly enough, being very careful not to kill any of these people. I don't profess to know very much about Wolverine as a solo character, but I thought that he didn't mind killing people when he's out on his own, away from the X-Men. Oh well. And it doesn't really feel like I'm reading a story about a human being. It feels like I'm reading a story about a force of nature, cutting through everything with amazing ease. Like if you watched a movie about an earthquake. Not a movie about people coping with the effects of an earthquake, but a movie about the earthquake itself. That's what this book really is, I think. Anyway, aside from this protagonist being completely unkillable, and thus all of the dramatic tension being gone concerning the danger that the protagonist might be in, there's other things about this book that aren't really working for me. As we see in the first issue, Logan thinks that he's killed the Scottish assassin guy after breaking his back and blowing him up. And then he finds out, nope, this guy has been active for 10 years and is now gunning for Logan. Throughout the entire book, I was absolutely convinced that it wasn't the Scottish assassin guy. It was too easy. It's like if a murder mystery tells you who the murderer is 4 minutes into the story. Warren Ellis is a better writer than this, right? He won't make it exactly who the story is trying to make you think it is, right? Well, no, he does. Warren Ellis doesn't do anything to make you be all, whoa, I had no idea. Which, again, all dramatic tension is removed by taking a bad guy who we do not see for the entire story, except in flashback, and then making it exactly who you were trying to make us think that it was. What makes this worse is that when Logan gets to the little house where the assassin is hiding, we do get a moment where Logan thinks that he's been tricked. We see the son of a Chinese gangster who had hired the Scottish assassin 10 years earlier, and he claims to have been behind this whole enterprise. Well, Logan kills him, and then it's like, nope, the Scottish assassin guy was in the other room. So what was the point of having the son of the Triad being there if you know that Logan has super senses and would smell you anyway? You might be asking yourself, how is the Scottish assassin guy still alive? And that question is never really answered. The assassin gives some crap answer like, hate kept me alive. But really, that's weak. Very weak. If this was a comic book that is more or less set in the real world and Warren Ellis wanted to do a story where someone believed dead was really not, then that'd be one thing. But this is the Marvel Universe, where cyborgs, cloning, and super advanced medicine all exist. If Warren Ellis wanted to do something crazy, like say that the Chinese Triads hired AIM to take the assassin's brain and put it into a new body, then why not just do that? Why half-butt it with this hate kept me alive nonsense? Another weird thing that comes to mind when I read this book is, why now? Anytime you do a story that has its roots in the past, and something the hero did is coming back to bite him in the keister, you have to ask, why has the thing coming back to bite him in the keister taken so long to do so? If the Scottish assassin guy survived certain death 10 years ago, why didn't he just come after Logan a month later instead of waiting 10 years? Now, I know the reason. If Warren Ellis is tasked to do a Wolverine story set in the here and now, and he wants to do something where something comes back to bite Wolverine in the keister, he can't easily say that it happened just a year ago, right? Because that would get in the way of the previous 20 years of stories that Wolverine has been a part of. And that makes sense to me, but from a character point of view, why would this Scottish guy choose to wait 10 years? What reason could he possibly have to do so? It's a hole in the story that exists simply because of the kind of story that is being told here. Now, I don't want to make this book sound like it's one of the worst things I've ever read. It's not. I've read far worse, believe me. But the book isn't great either. I think part of my problem was I had high expectations going in. I think if I ever wanted to read this again, knowing everything that happens, I'd probably enjoy it a lot more, just on a, oh, this looks nice kind of level. The book isn't entirely without substance either. I know I gave the impression that it is, but it's really not. At the beginning of the book, Warren Ellis gives a little foreword about how this book is about looking the monster in the eye and you either kill or be killed. It's a really nice foreword, actually, better than the content of the book if I'm being honest. And if you read this before you read the book, you can kind of see this theme permeating the book. But it's one of those things where if I had read this after I read the book itself, I probably wouldn't have caught on to there being any kind of theme while reading the story. It's just a story where Wolverine goes and finds a dude he thought he killed and then kills him again. Well, he gives him a heart attack or something. This book is so weird about Wolverine refusing to kill people when that's a huge thing that he does normally. So yeah, there's a theme to this book, but it's very sparse and isn't especially easy to pick out unless I'm told to look for it going in. But then again, I've never been one to be able to see the intentions of an author very easily concerning theme or character motivation or something like that, so maybe that's just me. So this book, I'd have to say there's really no reason to pick it up. Not that it's so bloody awful that you'll hate yourself for paying money for it, but some 17 years after this story happened, I just don't see any reason for someone to read it. It's not going to be heavily referenced if you're trying to get into Wolverine. And if you're looking to hit up some of the best Wolverine stories, well, I'm not the person to ask about that. But this one definitely wouldn't be on that list if I was the person to ask. Remember, I don't think it's a bad story, but if you've got money to burn, there are definitely better stories you could do so with.